Welcome back to another episode of the React Native Radio Podcast. Episode 331, New Architecture, New Era, with Riccardo Cipolleschi.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of React Native Radio. I'm Jamon, she's Robin, he's Mazen, and we have a guest, actually a returning guest this time, Riccardo. Riccardo, can you say your last name again? I think I practiced it last week and then I forgot to practice it this morning.
Don't worry too much. My last name is Cipolleschi, but it's pretty hard. Even in Italy, they sometimes mispronounce it. So
Okay, all right. I don't feel so bad. Cipolleschi, something like that. Yeah, in that range. Yeah, it's good. It's close enough. Riccardo, Riccardo was on React Native Radio 270 with Kelset a couple of years ago, talking about React Native 0.72. So a few. What are we at?
Well, as of today, 7 versions ago.
Okay, there you go.
79 came out today as we're recording.
Yeah, this won't come out for a little while, but awesome. Well, we have a really cool topic to talk about. We haven't talked in depth about in quite a few episodes, so very excited to get into that. But before we get into that, let's hear from our sponsor. Infinite Red is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the US. We're a team of 30 senior plus level. We're all seniors. Someday we'll graduate, but we're seniors for now. React Native developers and some support staff. And we've been doing this for almost a decade. It's actually coming up close. In October. Yeah. Yep. So if you're looking for React Native expertise, hit us up, infinite.red/radio. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. All right, let's talk about our topic. We are going to be talking about the new architecture. And for those of you who, there might be some people listening to this who aren't familiar with the new architecture. They've maybe heard the term. They don't understand exactly what it is. Well, we're not going to go too in depth about that, but we will kind of give a little bit of a high level here. We want to talk to Riccardo, who's been one of the key people at Meta on the new architecture and just React Native in general, but certainly throughout this new architecture transition that is happening, community adoption and support, those types of things. So from my perspective, I feel like we're in this transition period in 2025 between two eras. We had the initial 10 years of React Native, which was focused on building on that foundation that Meta created in the very beginning, 2015, with, like the bridge architecture with original, I think it's kind of referred to colloquially as paper, the original architecture for the view layer and all of that, and the original native modules and stuff. Of course, that served us pretty well throughout history, throughout the decade. But as time went on, it became pretty obvious that, hey, if we want to move forward with what the React Web team is doing, as well as some other things that we know are issues with how React Native apps perform on startup, on, synchronous operations, on different things like that, we need to rewrite a bunch of stuff. It's a little bit disappointing that we have to rewrite a bunch of stuff, but we do. And so that's what Meta did. And actually, Meta's been on the new architecture for years now, and, kind of evolving it. Community support has lagged a little bit, not community support, but rather the community adoption has lagged a little bit behind. But with that said, last year, I really felt like it started to come together. Like 2024, it felt like the new architecture started to come together. We started seeing all these things, which was, of course, new architecture is Fabric, which is the new view rendering layer and how it kind of handles rendering views and laying out views and doing it in a way that works much better going forward with the new React concurrency features and whatnot. And then also TurboModules, which is more like lazy loading modules as you come in instead of loading everything up front that you may or may not need, as well as some other cool features. Bridgeless mode, so you're not having to send commands over the bridge. You can actually talk directly between your JavaScript engine and native, and code gen and some other cool features. So all these features, they're just known as the new architecture. That's kind of how it is portrayed. And so 2025, at least for Infinite Red, and I think across the community, has started to become, okay, we've done the core features of the new architecture are starting to mature. We're starting to have much more broad-based support among all the third-party libraries. Now it's time to start adding it to our apps. Now it's time to actually start building apps with it, start switching apps over. And really actually excited that like Mazen was able to be on this episode, because he's been leading a lot of that on our side and making sure he's tracking, how our teams are doing with this stuff. So we'll get into all of that. But I do want to really quickly talk to you, Riccardo, a little bit. How long have you been at Meta, and what's your key focus area there?
Hi, everyone. I'm super happy to be here with you, talking about architecture and React Native in general. I joined Meta 3 years and 3 months ago now. And since I joined, I've always been on the new architecture project, the new architecture rollout in open source. My background is on iOS engineering, so I started working on the rollout from the iOS perspective, and slowly ramped up on all the other topics of like how Android behave and how all the new architecture concept like TurboModules, Fabric, as you already called them out, Jamon. And yeah, my focus, aside from like iOS in general, has been exactly how can I help the community and the open source community especially to adopt the new architecture, and how can I enable our users to move to the new architecture successfully.
Yeah, definitely. And we've, of course, taken full advantage of that, asking you lots of questions throughout the years, and we appreciate your patience with us, and you're just you're a delight to work with. I definitely, I'm not just saying that. I know that our whole team feels that way. So yeah, I really appreciate having you on. Robin, I know you had something you wanted to check or ask Riccardo here about the new architecture's progress.
Well, we've been talking about it for, it feels like, it has been years that we've been talking about the new architecture. And for a long time, it was in this phase of like being in progress. Like it felt like it was in progress. It wasn't finished. But it kind of like the tone has changed a little bit, and it kind of feels more done. Would you like agree that like the new architecture from a technical perspective is considered like done? I mean, obviously software's never done. There's always going to be improvements or bug fixes or whatever, but is it like finished? And at what point will it stop being the new architecture and just be like the architecture?
That's a complex question, and so a bit of history, I think, is important here. So the development of the new architecture started at the end of 2018. I was not in the company, so a lot of whys, a lot of the whys that was necessary, and all the initial design, I wasn't there to participate and to learn about that. But yeah, there were some limitation at the beginning in how React Native was working that we needed to figure out and solve. And we are 7 years after the beginning of the development, 2018, 2025. And I can't say that is done, meaning that, as you mentioned, in the nature of software, everything is always changing, everything is always evolving, and we learn every day something new. So there will be improvements for sure that we want to bring in the new architecture. But we think that it is ready to be used in production. As Jamon was saying, we have been using the new architecture in production successfully in the Facebook app for a few years now. I think that we consider that done in 2022. So it's now
that's as done as software is ever going to get, if you have confidence to use it in production. Like that's kind of the measure.
Exactly. And so of course every day we discover some things that we can improve, maybe some edge cases that we were not considering at the beginning, especially because we tested the new architecture internally in the Facebook app, which is a huge surface of React Native code, but is not comprehensive of every use case that we have in the open source. So when we decided to promote them to stable last year, the reasoning was that we have been spending roughly 2 years, fixing all the gap that we could find, trying to make it backward compatible with the old architecture as much as possible. And we reached a point where we didn't we weren't receiving a lot of bugs from the community anymore. So it was like, okay, like seems like it's stable enough. Let's promote it to stable and let's see how thing goes. And let's have the community work with that and tell us what's not working for them so that we can together make the React Native better for everyone. So that was more or less the reasoning that let us promote it to stable.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a lot of 1.0 talk right now. Sorry. I just had to say. I just had to get that out early
If
in the
there was
episode.
ever a time, Riccardo, this is the time.
You said it's done. Let's use it in production. And these are all buzzwords that, large companies want to hear when it's 1.0 time.
I think I heard someone at some point say it's just never going to happen. That there's no plans to ever go to 1.0. I'm
kidding. I was joking. That we don't have to go into that one. That one is a long and complicated story. I get it. Yeah. That's good to hear. Now, I think one part like I want to shift into, and I had a lot of experience with it. Jamon mentioned, I think it was mid or early last year, I started what I'm going to call New Architecture Task Force internally, where I'm going to reach out to every single project of ours, see if they're on the new architecture. Why are they not? How can we help unblock them? And a lot of it pointed at third-party libraries. And that's kind of where things seem to always hit a roadblock. So we put together a long list of packages, kind of reached out to those packages, maintainers, and kind of try to figure out what's next, what's happening, what's your timeline. And I don't know if you noticed this, but a lot of them that are not compatible are large companies that require you to sign contracts with them. And that's kind of concerning to me personally. Like, imagine you're a company and you reach out to, I promised I wouldn't say names, but I'm going to say names. You reach out to Stripe, you reach out to Auth0, you reach out to Okta, and you're like, hey, I'm on the new architecture, are you? And they're like, oh yeah, it should just work. And you're like, no, it doesn't just work. There's work involved in getting it there. I'm not going to sign my $1 million contract plus to get it done. Now, individual contributors have had this on for 2-3 years. I can think of, some packages like Mark Rosavi, who had his packages on new architecture before new architecture was even released, right? And he's an individual contributor. And I can speak from experience, I had to actually reach out to Auth0, get some people, on email, have some meetings with them, be like, look, you're not in architecture. There's been an issue. Brent Vatney opened up an issue over 2 years ago about the new architecture, and it was kind of ignored until now. And I do have a large client that wants Auth0, but I'm trying to push them in a different direction because you're not on it.
I mean, or clients that are their entire enterprise is wrapped up in Auth0 or Okta or whatever, and they don't have a choice.
So I think, what do you think is the biggest obstacle for these maintainers, that it's taking so long for some of them? And, what can be done to help, remediate this? Because we're talking about, we're in the new era where we want new architecture to be the architecture. How do we get all the third-party packages there?
The problem with the third-party packages is the problem that we had to face also last year. One of the requirements that we have before promoting the new architecture to stable was that the most popular libraries should be compatible with the new architecture, right? Mm-hmm. And so with the help of Expo last year, which we collaborate closely with, we listed all the popular libraries using some data that we got from usage on Expo services that we know is as a proxy, right? We don't have data of how libraries are used from all the population using React Native, right. But we could use Expo data as a proxy, and therefore that's how we managed to get that list. But we make sure that all these libraries were compatible with the new architecture, meaning that they were either fully migrated to the new architecture or they were working through interop layers. Mm-hmm. So there is these two ways of using the new architecture. And of course, the ideal world will be where every library is migrated to the new architecture, right? Because they will not suffer from limitation from the old architecture. But we know that with open source and migration time are longer than what we can handle internally, of course. or how you can migrate internal app in Infinite Web. I'm sure that it's much faster for you to migrate an internal tool than something that depends on open source stuff, right? So that's a problem of long tail, basically, and something we need to keep in mind. We try to keep always in consideration that there will be people not migrating. There are libraries that are unmaintained. There is no silver bullet or a clear answer here, of course, but we try to be as compatible as possible with interop layers. We are thinking about keeping the interop layers around for a bit longer than what we had initially planned. And there's also a fun story about interop layers if we have time later. But yeah, that's the way to go. And if those companies, I suspect that most of those companies' code is native modules. And that's why they said that it should mostly work, because that's actually our experience. Many native modules were just working with the interop layer, even complex modules like Firebase, for example, with whom I work closely to make them work. They really require minor adjustment to work. And so I would be curious to understand why those libraries are not working fine, because maybe we can improve the interop layers so that they do. And that will get those maintainers more time to properly migrate. Here there is a bit of a problem, like if we continuously get more time for them to migrate, they will never migrate. So at some point we'll have to like,
you have to force their hand,
pull the plug and say, now it's time. If you don't migrate, it's not going to work. But
I think it's tougher on you all because like you're maintaining the interop layer in the new architecture, right? I think, can you, for our listeners that aren't aware, can you explain what the interop layer is and just elevator?
I want to hear the story too.
And the story. What's the elevator pitch on it? Because I know from digging into Auth0 specifically, I know what they did was they made their package interop layer compatible, closed the issue and said, we're done. Like we're done for now. We're going to look at new architecture in the future because we know we have time from Meta for that. So yeah, can you explain what the interop layer is? And, it seems like it's a middle ground, essentially.
So when we developed the new architecture, we changed the APIs of how you can write your modules and your component, right? So we moved from a world where we have the legacy architecture with the legacy APIs, and we need to bridge that world with the new architecture and the new APIs that we were developing. Initially, when I joined the company 3 years ago, there were no interop layer whatsoever. So you couldn't use native. You could use native modules and TurboModules together, but they need both infrastructure running at the same time. And you couldn't run, like if you were running Fabric, your old native components were rendered as like pinkish rectangles with a string saying, oh, your component is not compatible with the new architecture, so please migrate. And the story is that I was very against interop layer at the beginning because it was like, if we add interop layers, nobody's going to migrate. Like, to me, the solution was we have to make the migration as easy as possible. We have to reduce a lot of steps that are required, and that's what actually what we did in the first 6 months I was there. In fact, if you go through the history of the how to enable the new architecture guide on the website, you will see that like from 8 C++ file, we moved to 0 C++ file. From modifying hundreds of lines of the app delegate, we went to modify 1 line of the app delegate. So that's how we were working at the beginning. But at some point, it was clear that if we were to wait for everyone to migrate, we will never be able to enable the new architecture. So I disagree and commit in implementing the interop layer. I work with them. And specifically, I spent quite some time on the Fabric interop layer together with someone from my team. And at the end, that was the right call because last year, we were able to actually ship the new architecture thanks to the interop layer. And we will not be on the new architecture without them now. So that's the story behind that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so basically they are small bridges that connect the two worlds that allow you to use your native components in Fabric, and your native modules are going through the TurboModule infrastructure. And so you can effectively use the new architecture and forward all the method invocation to the legacy architecture and the legacy implementation.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I think for our listeners, we've mentioned this a lot. The React Native.directory is the best tool to see if your packages are compatible. And I believe Expo also has a command that you can run that will tell you if, you are new architecture ready or not.
What's the error that you see the most often if you try to use a package that's not new? I actually haven't tried this, where you just add a package that's not compatible. Like what pops up?
From my experience, it's been as you're building iOS and Android, it crashes then while you're doing the build.
Right. It can't find stuff.
So you're on iOS or...
Oh, it's just not finding...
C++. You'll see stuff like can't find C++ files.
Right.
Or bridging within there. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful to know.
But the Expo CLI should tell you that you are using a package that is not compatible with the new architecture.
Yeah, if you're using Expo.
If you're using Expo, the CLI is very developer friendly with that. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. We talked about, new architecture being done, third-party packages being integrated or not. Now, from a company's perspective, we've seen a lot of companies come in and say, we haven't heard of it. What is it? We don't want to go into new architecture.
It sounds scary.
It's very scary. Yeah. And you just mentioned interop layer, hey, you can get there incrementally, essentially, but not fully, right? But you can get there safely and get the gains from it. What advice would you give? Let's start with the company. What advice would you give the companies on why they should adopt the new architecture first?
The new architecture is the future of React Native, right? It's what Meta is using and is what we suggest people to use. And we working these days to create a roadmap to deprecating the old architecture, stop developing the old architecture. I mean, we are not developing the old architecture even now. We are still basically accepting pull requests that might fix something. But the real problem is that we don't have internally a way to test it. We don't use it anymore internally, right? Not in the Facebook app, but not even in all the other apps that we have that use React Native. So whenever a user submits a fix for the old architecture, we either import and land it trusting the person that submit the fix, or we don't have a way to test it. So if we decide to land it and then we release a new version of React Native with the fix, we might break everyone. We don't know. We don't really have a way to know that. And so on one side, to me, it looks safer for those companies to adopt the new architecture.
Right. You have to frame it like these are all the bad things that will happen if you don't.
Yeah. On the new architecture, sure, there might be issues, but you might have other issues in the old architecture. Right. So it's software, so it's not perfect. But at least we are using a version that is tested by Meta and by our partners instead of working on something that is legacy and not tested. The other reason is that, as I was saying, we are not using the old architecture. So you are missing out all the new things that we are developing, all the improvement that we are figuring out and releasing on the new architecture. Like at Connect, we shared that React Native is used on some apps in the Quest devices. Quest devices are Android devices, and they are much more constrained in terms of memory and CPU power. So to make React Native good on those devices, we need to figure out how to optimize React Native for Android in general. And those optimizations are all only on the new architecture. So if you are not on the new architecture, your Android app will generally be less performant than an Android app on the new architecture. And also, given that the new architecture is all written in C++, so with the purpose of sharing the code between iOS and Android, those optimization that we develop for the Android side of things, if they are on C++, they will be beneficial also for the iOS side of things. And so just by migrating to the new architecture, you are reaping benefit of all this work that you are doing internally on all your platform at once. So I don't think there is a good reason to remain on the legacy architecture unless there are some modules and components that needs to be migrated. And so you need some more time to migrate.
Mm-hmm. On that point, what would you recommend as the best migration strategy from your development team's perspective? Knowing that some third-party packages might not be ready, what would you recommend the path the developers take? We've spoken to the company, now we talk to the development team.
Yeah, so the first thing to do is for sure to enable the new architecture.
Turn it on. One line change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One line change, you should be able to build.
See UI breaks, follow the errors. That's.
Yeah, so, I mean, unfortunately, that's the way it is, right?
I mean, that's how I've done every React Native upgrade that I've ever done. So you just.
you migrate and you
breaks.
see what works and what doesn't, and you work backward from there. Sometimes it's simple application that just use third-party packages, and hopefully third-party packages that are compatible with the new architecture should not have any issue. If you have internal components and internal module, you should start looking into them and see if they work with the interop layer or not. And if not, tell us why they are not working, because we are actually having a look at all the issues that have been open. We are giving higher priority to the issues that are tagged as the new architecture because we want to make it as good as we can. And so really the way is turn it on, try it, and report what's not working. Sometimes it's just a configuration thing that we can help you out on the issue, and then you're good to go. And I've answered a lot of questions on GitHub for this kind of thing. Some other times you discover a real issue. For example, people at Firebase and at Center discover a couple of issues with the TurboModule interop layer that they reroute to us, and I was able to fix them for everyone. But if you are a company and your module is not working and you're trying to patch package React Native or fix it internally without telling us about it, you are making it hard for us, but also for everyone else in open source.
Patch package was one of the best things to ever happen. And also one of the worst, because the amount of times people just patch it and then not fix it upstream. But yeah, it's really like, I want to highlight that for the audience, especially that you running into errors and then telling somebody about it, filing an issue on GitHub is really critical to this process, because the meta team has no way of knowing what's broken in the millions of apps that are out there without someone telling them. So you trying it and reporting what's broken is a really critical piece of this process.
And yes, and I can say from firsthand experience, when you do open up that issue, Riccardo does reply to you in a very timely manner. And I've seen it with one of our client issues. We opened up an issue, Riccardo replied immediately. I think it was within a couple hours, and we're able to get a path forward for that task to get things fixed.
There's a way to open up issues that it's the most productive.
Yeah.
I will say that.
Please include your
don't
repro.
don't just copy and paste the error and fire it off.
Yeah.
A minimal repro is really helpful. The steps that you use to reproduce it, your environment, the packages, you go through, do your due diligence to make the issue as useful as possible. But I think the amount of work that the meta team has put in, we owe them that much, at least, to file useful issues. Yeah,
and sometimes doing the minimal repro, you'll find a bug somewhere you didn't expect. It's actually not what you thought it was. I think another thing that's sort of hurting community adoption is that not so much that maybe the third-party libraries don't support the new architecture, but they may be 5 versions behind. And to get up to speed on their third-party library to the one that does support the new architecture is actually a tremendous amount of work. And it's not just one. They have multiple third-party libraries. They're all kind of old. Their React Native version is old. Maybe it supports the new architecture, but it doesn't have all the latest bug fixes in it. And so they're pretty far behind. We just did actually a project.
Yeah, they were upgrading from 60 something.
Was it 60? It wasn't 68, was
I think it was 68.
Was it really 68?
Yeah. Well, and they ended up not adopting the new architecture because they're dependent on Stripe, which is still not compatible yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting up to even just a version where you're able to turn the new architecture on is a huge effort.
Yeah, totally. And Dan Edwards led that effort and got them up to I think he's currently on 77. There was an issue with 78 that he couldn't quite get past, that at least in the shorter engagement that we did. But there's, obviously we have a path also for getting to 78 and hopefully 79 now that that's out. But yeah, I mean, obviously staying on top of upgrades will almost always serve you well. We don't tend at Infinite Red to stay on the latest meta released React Native, we stay on whatever Expo's on. And that's a fairly common strategy across the board. Now, Meta does need people to use the latest versions too, because they need, yeah, nightlies would be great, but obviously also just the latest released, and because they need the bug reports and stuff. And there are people who like to be bleeding edge, and obviously go do that. For a lot of our clients, they can't really afford to be bleeding edge. You know, they're fairly mission critical apps. So we're on whatever the latest SDK is for Expo, even if we're not using Expo, even if it's a pure React Native app, we more or less stay there. That's not universally true, but that's kind of how we tend to approach it. But yeah, I mean, that I think often there's a lot of companies out there that are like, hey, you know, I would love to use all the latest and greatest stuff, but we're still on 73 or something, you know, and also the reason we didn't go to 74 is because, you know, some library we're using or multiple libraries we're using, we'd also need to update those, and that's a lot of work, and we've got a lot in our pipeline. So we get that. But I do agree that you're missing out on a lot of the latest performance, stability, all those things, as well as there's new libraries coming out that are only working on the new architecture. Mm-hmm. They're built for the new architecture. They do not work on the old. Maybe even the compat layer wouldn't work for the, you know, you're just kind of out of luck unless you upgrade. And so I do recommend you try to stay up on the latest and greatest if possible. So in that same vein, one of the bigger challenges, even within Infinite Red, and we have very experienced React Native developers. Most of our developers have been working React Native for many, many years. Getting all of them up to speed on the new architecture, like actually like, hey, how do I modify these native modules, has actually been a pretty big challenge over the past several years. I think the docs haven't quite been there, and you might agree, Riccardo, that the docs haven't quite been at a level where you can be really proud of them. Certainly, there's been a lot of work that's gone into the docs, and I don't want to, you know, take away from that. But just from our standpoint, obviously, that has been a challenge. I assume it's going to be more and more of a priority as, you know, the adoption keeps going. And have there been some improvements that maybe aren't as visible to us?
I completely agree with you. That could be better. In fact, this week at Meta, we have Better Engineering or Sustainability Week. So it's basically a week where we do not work on our regular projects, and we can spend time doing some fixes on the code base or documentation. And actually, I'm working on the documentation for the new architecture these days.
Oh, nice.
So expect something coming up in the next, hopefully this week. But, you know, with code review and stuff, it might take a little bit more. So some new articles will come up and in the guides on the website in the next few days.
That's fantastic.
That said, there is one thing that is worth mentioning. The new architecture, as I said, is stable. It's here to stay, and we think that it is production ready. But we learn new stuff every day, and so sometimes we change some API from one version to the other, or we change. For example, there are some changes coming in how modules are registered. One big change is in 79. There will be another change in 80 to, for example, to initialize your native modules that require the main queue to be initialized, for example, on iOS. And those small changes, you can see them in the APIs. That's not a justification not to create good documentation, of course, but you can see how if we develop a feature, we write documentation, then we rework the feature, then we need to rewrite documentation, and the loop is continuous, right? So what we try to do is to write a minimum set of documentation that we think is stable enough, that is not going to be changed. And when we are sure that the new features are stable as well, we improve the documentation for them. We also, this year, we also kickstart internally a new process that will make sure that all new features that we are developing are going to be documented to some degree in the website. So I think that 2025 will be a good year for React Native documentation in terms of how the new architecture is explained, how also the React Native core is work. Like we have another colleague of mine, Ruben, is actually working on documenting how the internals of React Native works. That work will not be in the website, but will be probably in the repository in the form of like markdown documents. But if people are interested in understanding some of those changes, why React Native works that way, there will be documentation for that.
2 points. One, your native module document is great. I've referenced it many times when we gave a training, I think we've mentioned on the podcast earlier this year. One of the last sections is, everyone's like, hey, I want to do the React Native advanced tutorial. And that's usually now in today's world, new architecture, native module building, stuff like that. I built it out and then actually I went and redid the tutorial that you all have on there, and they were both great, and they kind of helped me refine and kind of push it forward. I think that it's great. And I think outside of that, I'm sure you all would appreciate it if the community also opened up some, tutorials or docs towards the documentation to help you kind of speed up that process, right? Like you mentioned, you're doing a small set of the docs, that's one person for a week, right? The docs there's a lot of docs out there that need to be written. So getting more firepower on it is a call out that I think we should all have. The next thing I kind of want to dovetail into, and I think it comes from being, we're all React Native fans and we want to see it grow. And we think it's very important. It's critically important, dare I say, to the ecosystem, the new architecture. Do you feel that your need to go to the new architecture was the best and most relevant decision to help React Native stay relevant and continue to grow and be cutting edge in the industry?
Like, would it have become irrelevant as a framework if you had stayed on the legacy architecture and not changed?
About what if question, which is hard to give up an answer that is accurate, I think that the legacy architecture served a lot of purposes and served them well, but there were some evident limitations that we needed to figure out how to solve them. And they were architectural limitation, right? Like all the blanks in flat list, for example, or if you have a lot of native modules, your React Native application startup time was very, very, like it was taking a lot of time to start up, right? Those were intrinsic limitation of the architecture, and it was not possible to like fix it or work around them with the bridge architecture that we had in the legacy. So yeah, I'd say that yes, the short answer is to keep React Native relevant, we had to develop something new, to invent something new, and that was the new architecture.
I agree with that. And what I've seen online is a lot of times, there will be these criticisms of React Native, which often were valid for the older architecture, the legacy architecture. And but the answer can be, hey, look, that was valid, but the new architecture does address this, and there's some very promising early results, with that. So it really does help keep React Native relevant and competitive with all the other kind of options that pop up. We do have to wrap up here, but this has been fantastic. Really appreciate it. Riccardo, you coming on again. There's so many more questions I want to ask you, actually. I wanted to ask you about, for example, Nitro modules and, the different ways of doing things that are popping up out of the community. But I don't think we have time to go into all of that. So we're just going to wrap up, but maybe I'll ask you offline. So I appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. And I think that's it for our episode. So we'll call it here. Appreciate everybody coming along with us, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
As always, thanks to our editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor, Jed Bartosky, our marketing and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Mazen Chami. Our producers and hosts are Jamon Holmgren, Robin Hines, and Mazen Chami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/radio. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio on all the major podcasting platforms.